Welcome to the Real eCommerce podcast, your go-to for straight talk and smart tips from the world of online retail.
So, as we just said, honoured to be your first podcast. Benjamin Hosack, thank you very much for joining me.
Yeah, thank you, Adam. Appreciate being on here. And it is my first, and please excuse any first-time nerves and all that sort of thing.
I'm sure we'll battle through those, no problem at all. We've been kind of working together for the last 10 years, I guess. It seems a good working relationship we've had. And for us, that started with Foregenix. But before you started Foregenix as one of the co-founders, what kind of got you into cybersecurity? Were there any things that you did, in your younger days that kind of led you into that as a profession, or what got you started?
Yeah, it's a good question. Well, it all started back in, I'm a Zimbabwean originally, so I finished my high school in Zim, and I got offered a place at the university in Cape Town. Which was quite a difficult thing to do because I was Zimbabwean, not South African. So, I had to go and get all the visas and things. Finished my degree, which was an economics degree, and I was offered a job in Johannesburg at a large IT company called Dimension Data. We're talking about sort of late 90s. It was 99, actually. And I couldn't get a work permit. I wasn't the right kind of profile that the country wanted at that time, didn't fit the right kind of demographic. So I moved to the UK in early 2000 because my grandparents were all British, so it was an easy move. And I stayed with the company that had employed me, and met various people over the next couple of years, and how things work. You strike up relationships and good working relationships with people, and eventually doors open. And I got asked to join a young business in 2004 that was focused on payment security. And so I did it. I jumped. And at that time, I'd actually left the big business already, the big corporate, and I had already taken a leap into starting up a smaller sort of business related to my background in Zim, and it didn't actually work out. So when I got offered this opening to get into back into the cybersecurity or IT world, I thought, okay, look, let's go. This is a great opportunity. And actually, at the time, I'd been offered a job at Vodafone. So, huge corporate again. I was like, shit, this is great. I could certainly go down that route, and it's guaranteed. And it's all very exciting. Or I can go and join the scrappy little startup as employee number one. And I chose that.
It's more appealing to you as a person.
Yeah, it's way more exciting. And, I suppose with the benefit of hindsight, looking back on this and having spoken to so many people over the years about it, when you're in your mid-20s, you've got very little to lose, and actually at that time you should be trying. And that's how I think about it.
Yeah,
anyway.
I completely agree.
So I was quite willing to just push into this, and it was exciting. It was working with a guy that I respected greatly at the time, and so it was an opportunity. So joined that company. It grew rapidly, and as employee number one, I also set up the sales team. That's basically what I was doing. I was getting clients on, and just it was a really fast growth kind of time.
Like the .com boom at the same time.
It was just after it. It was 2004, but it was right at the beginning of the payment card industry. So if you've ever heard of PCI, I mean, most of you've heard of it, but most of your clients should have probably heard of it. It was right at the start of that. We were literally the first company that was, involved in helping organizations get the right kind of security controls around payment data. So, I've been around the block a little bit there. That company grew really rapidly and was bought out a couple of years later by a company called, what was it called? Trustwave. Called Trustwave. And a big American company funded by VCs, etc. They came in, they acquired this company, and completely changed the corporate culture and approach. And it took me about a year. We had an earn-out and had to focus on the earn-out, and I was in in charge of sales for the region at that point, and lots of the clients were getting a bit upset with how things were changing. Can you hear me, by the way? Things are going a bit fuzzy on my side.
Yeah, I can hear
Adam?
You. Yeah.
You can hear me. Okay, so at that time, the clients were coming back just saying, we don't really like how this change has taken place, and it's really uncomfortable, and they were looking at alternative suppliers, and I approached my partner in Foregenix at that time. We were working together, and he's a brilliant technical chap. He headed up the forensic practice. He's one of the top forensic guys globally. So he's one of the top forensic guys in the industry, and so I got him, took him for a beer, and said, "Look, what's happening here is not good. Everything that we built over the last few years, and our relationships with our clients who trust us and have we've worked with for ages and we've supported, they're really upset. I think we can do better." And he agreed, and that was it. We started Foregenix a couple of months later, and it's now been nearly 17 years. So that's, you asked me a question, I've actually given you such a long answer.
No, there's a lot there.
That's how it happens,
How prevalent was fraud at the early stages of e-commerce and the early stages of online payments? Because, obviously now we'll come on to now in a bit, but back then was it as was it in its infancy? No. Was there a lot of fraud happening, or what were you mostly?
It was really in its infancy. So our forensic practice actually started. Andrew joined that same company that I joined in 2004. He joined in 2005. Okay, so that was when we first started doing forensics. And I remember the first e-commerce forensic that came in was one of the biggest UK brands that that we all know, and many people will have bought their clothing, the fashion items from this company. Anyway, they came in with a problem and said, "Look, well, not with a problem. Their bank said, look, we think you've got a problem. We've identified fraud on a bunch of cards, or Visa or MasterCard have, and they've narrowed it down to you being the common point of purchase. And we need you to have an investigation, and we want you to talk to these guys." And so we were called in, and this company said, "Look, we don't think we got a problem, but go ahead." And Andrew was sitting in the office at that point. Andrew, my partner, and he was doing his thing, working his magic, and from an investigative perspective. And he was on the phone with the clients, and the client was adamant that there wasn't a problem. And Andrew said, "No, I think there is. I can see all the transactions being harvested, and you've got this transaction that's just been taken." And the client at this company said, "No, that transaction hasn't. We don't have that transaction." And then a second later, he said, "Oh, there it is." And literally in real time, we were watching this criminal harvesting. Well, Andrew was watching this criminal harvesting the payment data. That was the first really big one. That was probably about 2006, 2007. But between that time and probably I'd say 2012, 2013, most of the cases that we did were not e-commerce. They were big, retailers, hospitality, hotels, restaurant chains, that sort of thing, banks, processors, that sort of thing. Big organizations where the criminals are breaking in and stealing huge numbers of cards.
Mm-hmm.
But we started to see a change in about 2012, 2013, and that was when e-com started increasing massively, and actually started becoming the majority of what we were doing. And I've got a chart actually that tracks it. And from 2015, there's a clear difference between e-com and non-e-com. And then by end of last year, it's 99% e-com. It's almost all e-com that's getting targeted.
How did the relationship with Visa and MasterCard come about then? Because we perhaps not started our relationship, but when you found that there was an e-commerce retailer that had a breach, Visa or MasterCard, like you said, would detect that they're the source of potentially the
Yeah.
problem. And then they would make you do, is it called a PFI scan?
Yeah, it's called a PFI, PCI forensic investigation.
Yeah. And then that's
Yeah.
where they would kind of always point to you to do that service. Is that something you set up in the earlier days before you know, with the previous company that you sold to ThreatView, or is that something
Yes.
that,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's a relationship you carried forward from the first company?
Yeah, correct. It's a relationship that's been built over 20 years.
Yeah. And so is that a global thing that you do for them, or is that geographically, you know, is that a geographical?
It's global. So
Yeah.
if we're talking about Foregenix for a moment,
Yeah.
Foregenix is one of 3 companies that has a direct relationship with MasterCard, for example, for forensics. The other 2 are Verizon, you know, huge corporate in the States, and then Trustwave, another huge corporate in the States. I think Trustwave's now called Secure Trust. They've changed their name. So we're a scrappy underdog, you know, the smaller dog in the fight. And those guys are huge, big corporates, but, you know, we tend to beat them if we come up against them. And so MasterCard engage with us for situations around the world. Those guys tend to do more of the US-based things, although historically we have done quite a few in the US. But, you know, if there's something in Bangladesh or Nigeria or, you know, somewhere outside of the US, we tend to get the call. So it's been an interesting relationship, and you know, and it's been a challenging relationship at certain points because you do get dropped into these challenging situations, and you know, the expectations and stakes are quite high because they tend to be, you know, large fraud cases, and, you know, time is of the essence, etc., etc., etc. But no.
I think my experience with it is being the agency in the middle is for the retailer. Visa and MasterCard have already appointed you, in a sense, to do the PFI, but the costs and the fines are paid by the retailer, right? So if they are found to have had, you know, a breach and card details have been, they can be fined per case. Is that right?
So MasterCard and Visa don't appoint us. There are actually a number of companies that are called PCI forensic investigators, and there's a whole set of requirements that they're required to have in place to be able to do that. So not anybody, or, you know, any IT company or security company can do it. You actually need to have the relevant qualifications and background and all that sort of thing. So there is a market that the retailer can go to, and they can get quotes from a bunch of different companies, and then they make their choice on who they want to work with. But from a liability perspective, the fraud, someone has to carry the can at the end of the day. And when a merchant takes out the facility to handle card data, card transactions, they also agree to protect that data and to be held responsible if that data gets stolen. You know, and that's what the whole PCI program is about. It's about protecting that data. And so there is a potential liability. Whether the card brands exercise that right every time or not is completely up to them. And, you know, we know cases where, yes, it's been incredibly expensive, and that tends to be in the bigger end of the scale. But then on the smaller end of the scale, sometimes they just waive the penalties, you know. And one card brand tends to be sorry.
With the data protection breaches, you know, the ICO, they seem to be after the big sort of headline ones to make sure that it's led from the top down. But the smaller companies seem to get away with a telling off. So it works the same way, does it? Or it can work the same way.
It can do. It depends on a few things. What we've experienced is when you have a merchant who's accepts that there's a problem and actually works quickly to try and resolve it, that's when we see, you know, the card brands tend to be quite happy, because what they're looking to do is contain the situation. They don't want to have an ongoing problem where card data is getting stolen,
Mm-hmm.
transaction by transaction. They want to contain it as quickly as possible. So if the merchant works with the investigator, and it's, they get to contain it quickly, and they get, it's a smooth process, then, for want of a different or an easy expression, then the card brands don't seem, certainly on the smaller end of the scale, they don't seem to be levying those penalties. But one of the card brands does levy what they call an assessment fee on every single one of them. So that can add to the expense. But in terms of fraud liabilities, no, they tend, if the merchant works with the investigator on the smaller end of the scale, our experience is that they tend to be waived. But if they don't, that's when the book tends to get thrown at them.
So it's like if you're cooperative and you want to resolve the problem, their main thing
That's
is
the
to
word.
send them the bleed in a way, and if they can do that quickly, then, and you're cooperative, then I think okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
and you said kind of there's a real shift from 2015 where it's gone from bigger corporates into maybe smaller retailers or medium-sized into smaller retailers. And I'd imagine there's a bit of an evolution of the type of attack that's been deployed, because we used to get things like credit card hijack scripts that would be at the checkout before there was iframes and things like that. So what's the evolution been of these things over time?
That's exactly what you've outlined. We, in the early days, they would put sort of basic card skimmers in place that would basically steal the payment data. They would append it to the back of an image file, and they'd come and download this image file with 100,000 credit card numbers on, or whatever it might be, 1,000 of credit card numbers. And that evolved to where, through sort of 2015 to 2024, actually, digital skimmers were easily the most prevalent type of malware that we saw in the e-com space. The British Airways attack, and there have been loads of them that have been really well publicized. And it's effectively a skimmer sitting on the checkout process, very much like an ATM skimmer. I mean, you'd be familiar with this, but people in your audience might not be. So an ATM skimmer, you can't see that the ATM has been corrupted, and you put your card in, and it basically takes a copy of your card data. Exactly the same thing happens on the checkout process. It happens in the visitor's browser, and so digital skimmers are the most prevalent. But that sort of changed in early 2024, and we started to see what are called loaders. And a loader effectively is the first stage of a multi-stage attack. So a loader tells the visitor's browser to go and collect a script from somewhere else. So it's loading a script from another domain into their browser, generally another skimming script. But that skimmer doesn't sit on the website, it sits somewhere else, and the loader sits on the website. And I think the reason why we started to see that change, or we saw that sort of inversion of or change in the most dominant type of malware, was because the more sort of generalized security systems out there have begun to understand what digital skimmers look like. So it made sense for these guys to get a bit more clever about how they deploy their skimmers. So they can't put the skimmer on the actual victim site. They've got to put it somewhere else. So they load it using a loader. So that's where
load of files are placed on the server of the site, but then it calls in a script from a third-party server.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Those are a lot more difficult to pick up because, VirusTotal or Google, whoever it might be, they don't yet know what that looks like. They tend to trail the market by a couple of months at least. So, as this new malware comes out and evolves, it's only the organizations that are really working with this day to day that are able to sort of identify and alert on it. The rest of the market takes a while to catch up. But once they do catch up, they do force the change in activity from the criminals.
So you had a window, if I'm right, you had a window from 2015 to 2024 where skimmers were the primary method of attack, or
Yeah.
the primary method of siphoning cards, and really only last year that's now changed to loaders. Is the
Yes.
industry adapting quicker this time to the threat than it did with skimmers, because obviously it's more aware of the threat and the threat is bigger? Or
Well, that's a good question. Yes, the industry is adapting, and the way they're adapting is the PCI Security Standards Council has come out with a couple of new requirements for e-commerce sites. And one of those is to monitor the scripts on the checkout process. So that's requirement 6.4.3. Okay. And that was brought into effect in April this year. And I'd be amazed if there's been a huge take up of that yet, because, just through experience of working in the PCI space for 20 years, these things take time for the industry to pick up. So I don't think that is yet sort of affecting change in the industry. It definitely will. I mean, I'm sure in a year's time we'll see that. But in terms of what's happening in the industry, it's quite interesting. We monitor about 16 million sites around the world, but we check the security of them. We scan them every 2 weeks using ThreatView, our platform, and using all the latest fingerprints. So every time a forensic case comes in, every time a new bit of malware gets identified, we fingerprint it and then we scan, at scale and try and identify what's going on and re-alert as many people as we can.
By fingerprinting, you mean you've kind of mapped what it is, so you know what you're looking for.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly. And about 2.5 years ago, January 2023, we were seeing around about 5,000 sites a month getting compromised. It's in that cohort, so a pretty low number. I mean, a significant number, but low relative to the industry. And that has gone up to, last month we saw 41,000. Okay, so it's gone from 5 to 41.
10x.
Almost a 10x. Yeah. But it's, along the way, we've also identified more malware. So our detection capabilities have improved. So, that 5,000 2.5 years ago, maybe we were not, definitely we weren't seeing the whole market. Still we're not seeing the whole market, but we're seeing a heck of a lot more. And I don't think there are many others who can see as much as we can either. But, and that's evolving. But just to go from 5 to 41 is just quite a significant step up. So when you ask if this is, if the effect is taking place in the industry, well, I don't think so. Not yet.
And we're seeing just
increasing numbers.
That's as a percentage of the customers that you monitor. That's not including, ones that aren't monitored by ThreatView or Foregenix.
Exactly. So it's just interesting. The industry tends to be focused on sales, as you would expect, and sales, the technology to enable sales, and I think security tends to be an afterthought.
But as with anything in life, prevention is better than cure, right? So your cost to come and do a scan when there is a problem versus your cost to monitor and check,
that's very different,
isn't it? So, is that where ThreatView really, you see the value for e-commerce retailers is by having ThreatView, you are able to use this database of fingerprint matched, threats. And if you see that within their code base, you can alert the customer that there's been a compromise before too much of that data has been taken away.
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what it's for. I mean, we work at multiple different levels within the industry. So we work with merchants, and ultimately that's what we're trying to do, is to protect the ecosystem. And that tends to be the smaller to mid-sized e-com sites. Those are the ones that are getting targeted in the biggest numbers. Because they don't have the skills, the resources, or experience to be able to defend themselves properly. And almost none of them are using the right technologies to do that. So they're quite easy to target. And that's our mission. So yes, we have technology that helps them, and we use the fingerprints, but then to get to those merchants is quite difficult. We're a tech business, a cybersecurity business. We're not the best at marketing ourselves, and I put my hand up, and that's my responsibility. So we're not that good at that, but we do build partnerships like we've built with you guys, like we have with Mastercard, and we have with various banks around the world, processes, etc. We monitor portfolios for banks, and we help those banks to identify merchants who might be at risk of getting compromised. And then the banks then contact the merchants and say, look, we would like you to use ThreatView, and you can either get a free version of ThreatView, which just scans the external aspect of your site. It's like a visitor coming to your site, or they can deploy our advanced edition, which basically sits inside the site and monitors the file system and the database, and it helps with PCI compliance and all that sort of thing. But it's a far more comprehensive security solution. But the way to get to the merchants is, has to be through various different channels, and it's quite a challenge to get to them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the value in what you can potentially save the customers, like you just said, there's a percentage there. There's a 10x growth in this threat. There's a bigger percentage chance of you being caught up in this, especially if you're running open source technology, self-managed technology, custom platforms, if you've got middleware for things as well, where the data is being moved between, different locations, all of those things, you've got a bigger threat, you've got more happening every month. And if you're running those platforms, this is a kind of small price to pay for that peace of mind, really, that you're not going to suddenly find that you've been compromised and you need to pay for a bigger PFI scan and potentially fines from Visa and MasterCard, which are, can be astronomical if they want them to be.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, BA, I don't actually know what their penalties would have costed in the end, but had they used our technology, it would have cost them $189 a month, and we would have detected that issue in a heartbeat.
Yeah,
and it would have saved them.
Portugal or something, that would have cost them, wouldn't it?
What's that?
One more.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's nothing in the scheme of things, and the huge impact that it had on their brand, on just as everyone, every single executive club member would have been worried about their data. I mean, they've had issues with the ICO, etc., off the back of that. But yes, if they had our technology on their site, they wouldn't have had this problem. And that goes not just BA.
Know, right? If there has been a breach, they need to let their customers know if there has been a breach.
Yeah, they do. Yeah.
So it's gonna put people off the brand. Maybe they choose a different airline. Maybe they don't fly as often with that particular airline. So there is a damaging factor to the revenue as well, not just what you get from fines and costs of services and things like that.
Yeah, the trust is an issue. I'm sure they've recovered. And that there is a cycle, and we've seen it many times where trust falls off the cliff, and revenues as a result are affected, and the penalties that come in, and it takes a few months, but if they handle it in a reasonable way, it doesn't take too long to get back up to where they were before. But it still does cost a heck of a lot in that time when they have a problem. So yeah, prevention's better than cure any day. And the costs of having a solution that monitors that site and protects that site versus reacting, it's just they just don't sort of balance out.
So we used to have this kind of triage of security that we use on kind of open source sites, which was Cloudflare as the web application firewall. ThreatView as the kind of detection system, and then we often used Securi to remove the threat. Does ThreatView offer the removal of what it finds when it finds the compromised files and things on the server at the same time?
Yeah, you can quarantine. We have a quarantine capability. We exercise caution, and we recommend exercising caution on automated removal, because the effect that it could have is, sometimes this malware is so well integrated with the site and some of the core files that it can cause a knock-on effect on the site. So automated removal is great, except when it breaks something and then can end up causing more problems later. So we tend to offer a quarantine. Well, we offer a quarantining option, and we provide all the guidance on how to remove it. So we take a different approach to Sucuri. But, we have clients who use Sucuri, like you guys, Sucuri and ThreatView alongside. We also have Sansec and ThreatView alongside. We have lots of clients who layer up on the security solutions, because that's the thing. None of the solutions out there will be able to give a 100% detection capability. They just can't.
No. But you're saying some of the malware now is actually going in and changing the other core files to almost like disguise itself or integrate it deeper into the code. Is that what it's doing?
We saw an amazing one. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Yes, you do. They integrate the malware into certain, into core files, and if you quarantine that whole file and take that out of play, it's going to have an effect on how the website operates. So, but yeah, I mean, we've seen some ingenious attacks. There was one last month, which we published on our website, called Mirror Mask, and our team, who've been working in forensics for a long time, they said that this was easily the most elegant and clever heist that they've seen in an e-com space. It's quite a funny thing. There's a huge amount of respect for what these criminals are doing. They are obviously extremely good at what they do, and it's they just made a very, very small code change in the checkout process, and they basically mirrored Stripe's elements.
Wow, okay.
And all of it was tracked in ThreatView. We were able to very quickly identify the attack and the changes and alert others on it. But my word, it was extremely clever. But that's a kind of attack that you can't kind of just delete the file and you're done. That was an extremely clever attack that required some manual changes to the site to secure it.
And you just touched on something there which made me think is, so when you find these new threats, do you have like a business process where you then share that with other threat detection companies? So you're almost like pooling your data and knowledge base of what the threats out there are?
It's something we're considering, but no, up until now we don't. Okay. The one solution that we're considering looking at is VirusTotal. So we could be feeding our intel into VirusTotal, but then the challenge with that, speaking openly about it, is our threat intelligence is, one of the things that sets us apart from our competitors. So if we start sharing that with everybody, it helps everyone else to get better, and it sort of takes away our competitive advantage. I mean, right now, if you used us and Sucuri on some of the latest sort of e-com threats, Sucuri might pick up most of them, but they're certainly not going to pick up what we pick up because they're not as focused on e-com as we are. Sansec would pick up a different set. But at any sort of stage in the week, we might be identifying new malware that the others haven't seen. And if we share that with everybody, yes, it does help the industry as a whole, but it actually undermines our competitive capability.
It's kind of your IP for finding it and detecting and how it works and how you remove it.
It's a dilemma, yeah. What do you do? Yes, for the greater good, it would be right to share it, but actually, we're a little startup just trying to get our place in the world and establish ourselves. And if we do give away that IP, then why would people need to work with us? They could work with anyone else who uses our IP.
So just going back then, if you've got your services deployed on the site for threat detection,
Yeah,
and you are then asked by Visa or Mastercard to look into a case that may not have been detected, I would imagine that goes in your favour with Visa and Mastercard, that you are running, what you consider sufficient threat detection software, and there's been something that's either new, like you said with this new case of
yeah.
Mirror, or it's a threat that's not picked up in your software. That would obviously add to your case of prevention and kind of cure at the same time with Visa and Mastercard, or not?
Yeah, yeah, of course it would. And we've seen that happen a couple of times. So, take the mirror mask issue last month. It took once the client realized that there was something going on, they escalated to us, and within an hour or two, that site was secured. Okay, and the very next thing that they did was they escalated to Stripe and said, as their processor, they said, look, we've got this problem. Here's all the detail of what we've got associated with this. Turaco Labs and ThreatView have helped us. They've contained the environment. They're monitoring it, and contact them for more information. Stripe contacted us. We gave them all the threat intel that they needed to then go out into their customer base and identify who else was affected. And that feeds up to the car brands. So the car brands are actually really happy because this is a brand new attack that's been identified proactively. It's fed up through the right channels, and it's been contained. Okay, so from that perspective, it's great. It's great news.
So there's obviously an element of sharing these with the service providers, just not with your competitors, is what you're saying. So you're eliminating the threat.
Yes.
By going through a different chain than by letting every other threat detection software know about it.
With Mirror Mask, we put up the article, and there's enough information in there for anyone to go and create their own, what we call indicators of compromise. Yeah. But what we don't share on a day-to-day basis is our actual, what we call our indicators of compromise, our IOCs, the fingerprints. We don't share those. Okay. But we'll share the sort of broader strokes of what the attack is, especially if it's something like that's clever and it's unusual, and it's clearly been put together very very, very, very cleverly, and they definitely wouldn't have been targeting one site with this attack. There's going to be many sites that we would expect to be affected. So and that's worth sharing.
Platform, then, with platform, there's obviously ones that are more susceptible to attack than others. Obviously, our history together has been all about Magento over the last 15 years. And that has had its fair share of vulnerabilities, public vulnerabilities, and threats and attacks. So do you find that the open source / custom platforms are the more vulnerable platforms for this sort of thing, or is it across the board? Is there like a scale of because I would imagine the more popular the platform, the bigger amount of retailers on it and the bigger size retailers
bigger
on
target
it
is,
makes it a bigger fish to catch, right?
Yeah, and you got also a different profile for the different platforms. So I mean, Magento's had a bad rap from a security perspective over the last few years, but to be fair to Magento, it's not Magento that are the problem. They're just like any other software, and when a vulnerability is detected, they patch. They put out a patch, and the patch needs to be applied. It's how those sites are managed. So if those sites are not being managed on a regular basis, let's say the merchant doesn't have a management arrangement with their agency, then that site sits unpatched, and everyone blames Magento, but actually it's not Magento. It's how the site's being managed. Or set up. The agency or developer who set the site up doesn't understand the threats and how to protect against those threats by setting it up in a secure manner. Well, then that site's going to be a target, an easy target. So that's what we see is, yes, there's certain platforms that get targeted more than others. Looking at my screen here, I've got our stats from August. And WordPress is, easily the biggest target. The most compromised sites are on WordPress, but WordPress makes up a huge portion of the e-com space, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of small merchants are on WordPress. And the next biggest is Magento 2 or Adobe Commerce. And we're not talking about open source. We're talking about, actually this is open source and the commercial versions put together. I haven't actually split that out in this graph, but you're seeing both of them. And then we still have a lot of Magento 1 sites out there getting compromised. I know it's amazing that these sites are even operational still. I mean, but yes, but that they were easily eclipsing the Magento 2 or Adobe Commerce sites. But it's starting to dwindle on the Magento 1 side. But OpenCart, Joomla, PrestaShop, all of those sort of platforms are getting targeted. But you have different types of sites sitting on those different platforms.
Yep.
So, yeah.
And are you completely threat free if you're on something like Shopify?
No, you're not threat free. You're exposed to loaded question. You're exposed to the supply chain attack. From a management perspective, they are much more secure as a platform, but then also as a user, an admin user managing that site, you're also then responsible for ensuring that you're using good password policies and multi-factor authentication, that sort of thing. But really the exposure tends to come in from supply chain. Okay. So, one of the apps or widgets or whatever it might be gets compromised and malicious code gets dropped in that then gets pulled into the visitor's browser when they get to the checkout page on Shopify or BigCommerce or whatever it might be.
Yeah, because I think that's the misconception is, we're on Shopify, so there isn't a problem. But like you're saying, it actually then goes browser side. So it comes in through a different method, like an app, and then sits on the visitor's browser like a session replay tool would, and records the data that's being put in and siphons it off that way.
Exactly. I mean, to be fair, those incidences are a lot lower than, say, the WordPress incidences. The Shopify was in our top 5. It's dropped out of our top 5 in the last couple of months. But just to make the top 5 does mean that there's a fair amount of activity going on there. Yeah. So they are just by the nature of how they are set up in comparison to how thousands of sites are set up, when they're using open source software. You get it out of the box in a more secure manner, but the threat is the supply chain largely.
Well, there could be a change to that because they have released the SDK for the checkout now, so you can add apps and you can add kind of custom functionality to the checkout of Shopify. So again, if it is a way of loading it into the browser, you may see that rejoin the top 5 because of that. They're trying to be more open. So they're trying to accommodate more retailers by allowing custom checkout experiences. But before, where they have that completely locked down, they're almost in control of all of the code that goes into that. Whereas now they're opening the door there. So that could potentially sort of, open threats again.
I'd expect so. I mean, Shopify has been growing massively. And, in terms of market share, a lot of smaller businesses start on Shopify. And, as they grow up, they're, I suppose, as they get, you'll know this better than me, but I assume at some point there's the complexity and requirements for their site dictate whether they start looking at other platforms or not. But up to that point, there's a large portion of these sites. And, from a criminal perspective, that's a nice target to aim for. Cohort makes the Shopify, especially in the small to medium size as they're growing, there are a large number of them. And if you think as a criminal that if you can find a way to compromise one of the apps that sits in the supply chain, and when you're talking about them opening up the SDK for their checkout process, well, that's interesting. So let's keep an eye on that. And if that means that criminals are able to start attacking that system. They definitely will. They'll definitely be looking at how to attack it, because there's a really nice sort of target there.
It's just such a big ecosystem of retailers.
Precisely.
Isn't it? That's why it makes it like a target. Anytime there's more available to compromise, then they're going to go after it.
Yeah, and if we see something happening in that space, I'll certainly let you know about it. I can't imagine that. I can't imagine that they wouldn't be trying to, everything to try and crack into there. So,
well, I think the overall threat of these sorts of things has maybe worked as a tailwind for Shopify, because if you are a retailer, you're focused on making your products amazing, your marketing amazing, all of your content amazing. You're not really there to be a tech company and need the additional stress and worry of these sorts of things. So if they're moving to something that says, hey, we take care of all of that, then that's kind of probably what's helped Shopify grow, because it's not just from that perspective. You've got the hosting, security, updates, patches. All of those things are an additional cost, additional time, additional management time, if anything, to implement. So it's definitely helped with the tailwinds there. If you go back to open source, and like you said, WooCommerce, WordPress, Magento, my understanding of the different levels of card payment security, or the setup of card payment systems on the site, would be off page is almost like the safest option. So much as it's horrible for conversion, because you're literally taking someone away from the website, they're going to something that's unfamiliar, they're putting in their payment details, and quite honestly, a lot of the payment providers do a horrible job of making those pages look good. So you've almost gone from a really nice experience to something that looks like it came out in the early 2000s as a payment page. And then, when you've paid, you're then redirected back, and it does feel a little bit, it almost feels less secure doing that. But it actually is probably the most secure option, would you say, off page?
Yeah. It is the most, it's called a hosted payment page in the PCI parlance.
Yeah. And then would it be iframe is the next best thing? On page, if you want to keep the experience on page, is iframe, because that was when that came out, it was like, oh hooray, like there's a way of doing on page without doing on page. And the idea was that you're actually putting your card details onto the payment provider's server. You're not taking them and passing them on, right? So it's
you're not receiving and posting.
Yeah, it's like a wormhole through from your site to the server.
Yes, it's better. It's better than receiving the payment data and posting it out to your payment service provider. That is the third option, I guess. That is the option we don't recommend.
So stay away from self-hosting the payment page at all costs. iframe, if you want to keep that experience, but if you're really doing either of those two options, this is where your software is almost essential rather than a kind of nice to have. It's like
you shouldn't be doing either of those without excellent security in place. And the other thing to add to that is actually your not only security. You should have security on the site that does the redirection as well. But obviously the stakes are a lot lower because the transaction happens somewhere else. What we have seen is, and it happens from time to time. It's not a regular occurrence. So I don't want to sort of raise people's stress levels about it too much, but you can, if the website's insecure, we've seen criminals put in their own payment page. And so the transaction goes to them first, and they go, "Oh no, that didn't work. We're going to push you through to the payment service provider," and then they send it through to the redirect page. So no, look, all I'm saying is that
you could be doing everything right, and you still get had like that.
Well, yeah. So security is you should be making sure no one can break into your site. Okay, and if they do, you want to have something that alerts you that this is happening. But from a PCI perspective or a regulatory perspective, the overhead when you have a redirected payment page is much, much, much lower than if you have an iframe or if you're actually receiving the payment data yourself and then posting it through. In fact, if you're doing the iframe or receiving the data yourself, everything that we do within ThreatView, the file integrity monitoring, the malware checks, the checkout monitoring, the script monitoring, all that sort of side of it, those you have to have in place. You've got to have that. I mean, from a security perspective, best practice, you've got to have that in place anyway. But from a PCI perspective, you can't get compliant with the PCI unless you do have those sort of controls in place. So, but if you have a hosted payment page, there's far less that you have to look at.
I mean, I think that uptake on hosted payment pages must be, less than 20%?
You would know better than I do. That's not my area of expertise
it's
at all.
Just but it's not the experience I think any retailer wants to put their customers through.
No.
And yeah, again, like we're saying, if you want to offer that beautiful user journey end to end and you want to keep them on your site for the cost of the service that you offer, and avoiding those threats or trying to mitigate those threats down to as minimal chance as possible, it just it just seems like the obvious option. That's why we've kind of worked together for as long as we have. We want to keep people on page because they convert better, and if that comes at a cost of a small subscription to a SaaS service like yours, then it's an obvious one.
I appreciate that. Yeah, look, that's our perspective too, and we've tried to make it as cost effective as possible, without overloading the client with too much of a technical sort of journey. Because some of the things that we do are actually very challenging to implement if you weren't using an out of the box solution like ours. Putting file integrity monitoring on a site is no easy sort of thing. In fact, I don't think we've seen many, if any, sites out there over the years of forensics that have actually done this successfully. So, it's a very difficult thing to do and to do well. But
it's like the web services, since you started back in 2000 or the early 2000s, web services have split and sharded into professionals for almost everything. Even in our agency world, you'd start back in early 2000s as a full service agency that would do, marketing, print, web, and slowly they've forked into specialists for each one. So we just do e-commerce. There'll be print specialists. There'll be SEO specialists. There'll be PPC specialists. And how can anybody expect to stay on top of a very complicated industry like yours, one that's changing dynamically all the time, and do that for less than the cost of the subscription that you offer? It's just not worth it.
No, I don't think they can. I mean, I have we did quite a lot of market research when we were looking at our pricing, and to get an equivalent sort of level of service and monitoring and security controls in place, from buying different multiple services, you'd be spending $400-500 a month, US dollars I'm talking about. And I'm talking dollars because most of these products are available via the States. So we're pitched at $189. So, there's if you know what you're looking for, there's excellent value there. But it's about educating the market.
Well, hopefully this helps. And going forwards, have you seen any new threats that have been kind of AI driven, or does that pose any significant threat in the future for you that you've thought we need to keep our eye in on this or finger on the pulse with that?
Yeah, without doubt, it's going to become a bigger feature of our lives. I don't think we're seeing much of it yet. I mean, they're using AI to identify targets. That would probably be a logical use for it right now. But actually breaking in and deploying the malware, I think that's probably still being done on a manual basis. But there's absolutely the speed of that the industry is changing. The AI industry I'm talking about. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see this really hitting us, not just the e-com space, but broadly speaking, in a big way. And the industries are talking about it a lot. There's a lot of talk about it, but you have to kind of separate the hype and the sales pitch from the industry versus the threat. And It's quite hard to do. I mean, clearly there's a threat there, and it's definitely sort of going to be a feature of our future. Whether it's taking place right now, it's hard to say. I would say they're probably doing all their reconnaissance using AI. I mean, that would make complete sense.
It's just with the ability for AI to actually write and deploy code. Like you could see that there, you know how you're saying it's able to call on a third-party script from a loader. Like you can imagine that it's able to call on AI to change what it brings in every time, just enough for you to not see it as the same thing.
Not recognize it. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's definitely possible. Yeah,
yeah.
we're
It's
not
just
seeing
with
that yet, but
any emergence of technologies, there's the good use and the bad use, isn't there? And it's just trying to hope
totally.
the good is prepared for the bad. So it sounds like you're looking into that.
Yeah, it will emerge. I mean, we do have a very close relationship with the card brands as Turaco Labs and ThreatView, and we get a lot of e-commerce cases sent to us, and and that's only increasing. Go back 2.5 years ago, it was 5,000 we were seeing a month, and now it's 41,000. The card brands are seeing the same sort of thing, and so that's increasing. But they're mainly small merchants, and every single one of those that comes in gets analyzed by ThreatView. About 83, 84% of them are automatically dealt with. It's malware we've seen, and it's very easy to get them secured quickly and contained. The other 16 to 17% is new malware. So that's where we get our hands in there, and we have to manually check this and fingerprint and then. So it's a really good threat intel feed for us, but it also just shows that the market is moving so quickly. Yes, all these changes are being brought in by the PCI DSS or the PCI Security Standards Council. Yes, they will make a difference, but I expect that the industry will, or the threat actors will change just as quickly to try and get around it. So, it's the
goalposts are always moving, but that's life.
They're always moving. I mean, it's whack-a-mole, really. So
there's very few emails week to week or month to month I look forward to, but yours is one of them. Obviously, if people want to stay on the pulse with this, you do a fantastic newsletter that tells people about current threats. What are the other ways people can kind of engage with ThreatView, yourself, and stay on the pulse? Is the newsletter the best option?
Newsletter is good. LinkedIn, we're pretty active on LinkedIn. We've just started getting active on LinkedIn on our company profile, but connect with me directly, Benj Hosack. Look me up, send a connection request, and I'd be very happy to connect and chat. Or just get hold of me directly. My email address is bh@turacolabs.com. I'm really happy to speak to anyone. If we can help anyone, that'd make our day, really. So that's what we exist for, is to try and protect the ecosystem. So, I appreciate you bringing me on too, Adam. Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
Great chatting to you.
Super insightful, and I think it's something that the audience probably are aware of, but do they do enough to mitigate the problem? I think the service, having worked with you for 15 years, is the best out there. So thank you for joining me today.
Appreciate that. Thanks a lot, Adam.
Follow the Real eCommerce podcast and visit realagency.co.uk for more e-commerce content like this.